Hello, my name's Rob and I'm part of the clergy team here in Portishead. Welcome to our thoughts for this week. And I'm going to begin with the Gospel reading that's set for today, which is from Luke chapter 16, and it's Jesus' parable of the Rich Man and Lazarus. Luke chapter 16, reading from verse 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously each day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, who was covered with sores, and who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to them, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." Sometimes reflect on the fact that in Jesus' day, people's worlds were very small. You would have lived in a community and you would have known the people in that community, but not known about very much that was going on anywhere else. And that was the way things continued right up until really relatively recently. But for us today, it's a little bit different. Unlike the rich man in the story, not only are we aware if there is a poor person begging on our own streets, or more likely on the streets of Bristol, but through our television screens, through the internet, through newspapers, through images on our phones, we are aware of suffering in so many other places in the world. Be that in Ukraine, in Afghanistan, in Yemen, or wherever else it may be. We see these images all the time. And today we are familiar with the sensation of compassion fatigue. We look at all these people suffering and we say, what can we do? And the response in the last couple of days to the government's initiative to offer accommodation to Ukrainian refugees has shown the longing that is there in people's hearts to do something, to be able to help in some way. It's a really lovely response, just how overwhelming the response has been to that opportunity. Here we have a story of a man lacking compassion for the person who was at his gate. And I think, as is so often with these sorts of stories, he managed to convince himself that Lazarus was not really like him. He wasn't a person in the same way that he was. He didn't really see him or notice him. convinced himself that he was in some way deserving of the poverty that he experienced. So easy to do that, isn't it? So easy to think that if someone is there on the streets, then in some way they've done something to deserve that. And this story strikes at our hearts, I think. Strikes at our hearts because it reminds us that that's not an option for us as God's people. It reminds us that poverty is real, and for those of us who have the opportunity to do what we can to correct that, we need to take that. But of course, here, being a story that Jesus told, there's a little bit more to it than that. Here we're told with the eternal perspective that the roles are reversed. That the rich man ends up in Hades, struggling. The poor man is there at Abraham's side. Their roles are reversed, and the rich man can say it's not fair, and Abraham can say, oh, but it is. But you know, even this perspective, Christians have sometimes used to their advantage. The rich, the prosperous have said, oh yes, well, if the poor are going to have riches in heaven, well, we don't need to feed them now, do we? It's echoed in all sorts of ways, and not least in a song a verse of the hymn "All Things Bright and Beautiful" that fortunately we don't sing anymore, which went, "The rich man at his castle, the poor man at his gate. God made them high and lowly, and ordered their estate." As I say, fortunately, we don't sing that anymore. But you know, this isn't just a story about the importance of being generous, of sharing what we have and reaching out to those in need, although it is that. Because here, in the very last words of this reading, we see something which just reminds us that God's perspective is distinctive. It's not just about having compassion for those in need. Because Abraham says to the rich man, do you know, even if somebody were to rise from the dead, if the prophets haven't convinced your brothers, well, neither will that. And there we see a reference to Jesus' death and resurrection, a reminder that at the heart of the gospel is this topsy-turviness, this upside-downness that Mary recognised when she sang the Magnificat, and she said in response to the news that she was going to have the Messiah, she said, "You have brought down the rich and powerful, and you have lifted up the lowly and meek." It's there in the Beatitudes when Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor." At the heart of the gospel is this sense that God comes down to us. He comes as a servant. He gives up the wealth and the riches that he has. He comes as a poor, ordinary person. And Matthew tells us in Matthew 25 that those of us who feed the hungry, who give water to the thirsty, who release the prisoners, visit those who are sick, that what we do for Jesus himself. There's that really important, distinctive picture that the Christian faith and the gospel brings. That what we do for others, we do for Christ himself, because he comes to us in the guise of the poor and the needy at our gate. How are we going to allow that to touch our hearts? Well, perhaps it will be through offering a room to a family from Ukraine. Perhaps it will be through giving to those begging on the streets, remembering that fundamentally these are people just like us, and people in whom we might see the face of Christ.